The air hung heavy with the scent of grilled meat and fried potatoes, foreign and tantalizing as it wafted through the mess hall. Sergeant Hiroshi Tanaka froze, his weathered hands gripping the metal tray as the American server scooped a generous portion of ground beef patty onto his plate. Behind him, a line of fellow Japanese prisoners shifted uneasily, their eyes wide with disbelief. These men had endured months of combat in the Pacific, surviving on handfuls of rice and dried fish when supplies weren't cut off entirely. Now they stood in silent bewilderment as steam rose from the food before them, hot meals served with casual efficiency in the heart of enemy territory. "Hamburger," the American server said, pointing to the meat. "Good eat." He smiled and motioned for Tanaka to move forward in the line. Tanaka stepped aside, staring at his tray. The bread was impossibly soft and white, the meat thick and juicy. Even the vegetables seemed unnaturally vibrant. He had expected starvation and humiliation after surrender, not this abundance that mocked everything he had been told about America. What kind of enemy fed its prisoners better than Japan fed its own soldiers? What strange world had he entered where surrender brought not torture, but food that smelled rich enough to make his empty stomach twist with anticipation? The officers had warned them that capture meant only suffering and shame. Yet here stood Tanaka and his fellow prisoners, holding trays of hot food, while American guards watched without malice. What other lies had they been told about their enemies? And what did this simple meal reveal about the true strength of the nation they had been fighting? The mess hall at Camp McCoy, Wisconsin, hummed with the muted conversations of hundreds of Japanese prisoners, all trying to make sense of their new reality. Lieutenant Kenji Watanabe, once a proud officer in the Imperial Japanese Navy, sat rigidly at the edge of the bench, unwilling to fully relax despite the comfort surrounding him. For weeks since their capture in the Philippine Sea, he had prepared himself and his men for the worst. "Remember your training," he had whispered as they were marched onto transport ships. "Show no weakness. Death before dishonor." But death had not come. Instead, they had been processed efficiently, given medical examinations, clean uniforms, and now sat before meals that would have been considered luxurious even in peacetime Japan. Watanabe watched as his men cautiously tasted the strange American food, their suspicion gradually giving way to hunger. "It must be poisoned," muttered Corporal Yamamoto, eyeing his hamburger with distrust. "Why else would they waste such food on us?" Private Sato, younger and less hardened, had already devoured half his meal. "If this is poison," he whispered, "it is a pleasant way to die." The others glared at him, but their discipline was cracking in the face of such unexpected abundance. From the neighboring table, Private First Class Akira Nakamura, a former farmer from Hokkaido, stared at the meat patty on his tray. "In my village, we have not seen this much beef in 3 years," he said softly. "My younger sisters have forgotten the taste." The Americans served meals with industrial precision, 3 times daily. Each prisoner received portions that would have fed a Japanese family for days. Meat, potatoes, vegetables, bread, and even desserts. The routine was relentless in its generosity. Wake, eat, work, eat, rest, eat, sleep. Repeat. It was as mechanical as military drills, yet centered around nourishment rather than deprivation. Watanabe noticed other details that troubled him more than the food itself. The American guards ate the same meals as the prisoners. There was no special ration for officers versus enlisted men. Food was not a privilege or a weapon. It was simply provided, as matter-of-factly as the sunrise. This casual equality contradicted everything the imperial military structure had instilled in him. One evening, as the prisoners filed back to their barracks, Watanabe overheard an American guard complaining about the lousy hamburgers they'd been served that day. The lieutenant stopped in his tracks, puzzled. If these abundant meals were considered poor by American standards, what then was considered good? The question lingered uncomfortably, along with another more disturbing thought. If America could feed its enemies this well while fighting a global war, what did that reveal about its true productive capacity? As they settled into their bunks that night, the whispered conversations among the prisoners were not about escape or resistance. They were about food, about the strange, flat discs of meat served between bread that the Americans called hamburgers, about the sweet carbonated drinks, about the astonishing waste when uneaten portions were scraped into garbage bins. Such conversations would have been unthinkable in Japanese military barracks, where hunger was a constant companion and food was too precious for casual discussion. Yet behind these whispers lay deeper questions that none dared voice too loudly, questions about everything they had been taught regarding American weakness, decadence, and inevitable defeat. Questions that became harder to dismiss with each hot meal that appeared with clockwork regularity. And still, the greatest shock was yet to come. For the hamburgers served in camp were merely the introduction to an American institution that would challenge their understanding of warfare, industrial might, and cultural values more profoundly than any military briefing ever could. The revelation came 3 weeks after their arrival at Camp McCoy. The prisoners were being transported to a work detail at a nearby farm when their truck passed through a small Wisconsin town. There, standing on the main street, was a building unlike anything they had seen before. A strange yellow structure shaped like an arching letter M rose above a small restaurant, bright and cheerful despite the war that raged across the Pacific. "McDonald's," explained their guard, noticing their stares. "Hamburger restaurant, been open right through the war." The truck slowed at a traffic light, giving the prisoners a clear view of the bustling establishment. American civilians, men, women, and children, stood in line, emerging minutes later with wrapped packages of food. They ate casually, standing beside their automobiles or seated at outdoor tables. Their faces showed no sign of wartime stress or rationing deprivation. They simply enjoyed their meals in the sunshine, as if no conflict existed at all. Private Takeshi Ito, a former economics student at Tokyo University, pressed his face against the truck window. "They have restaurants just for hamburgers?" he asked in broken English. The guard nodded. "Sure do. McDonald's is everywhere. Cheap, fast, always the same no matter which one you visit. Same hamburger in California as in New York." He spoke with the casual pride of someone describing an ordinary facet of life, not realizing the impact his words were having. Ito translated for the others, and a hushed conversation broke out among the prisoners. Lieutenant Watanabe listened intently, his worldview shifting with each new detail. In Japan, rice had been strictly rationed since 1941. Meat was so scarce it had become a luxury reserved for the wealthy or the high-ranking. Restaurants had closed or converted to military canteens. The entire economic structure had bent toward the single purpose of war. Yet here was America, fighting the same war, but somehow maintaining these bright restaurants where civilians, ordinary citizens, could purchase meat products at will. Not as a special indulgence, but as an everyday convenience so common it warranted specialized chains of identical establishments. When they returned to camp that evening, the McDonald's sign had become the central topic of conversation. "It cannot be real," insisted Sergeant Tanaka. "It must be propaganda for our benefit." "No," countered Ito. "I saw children eating there. American families. If it were propaganda, why show it to children?" "Perhaps all Americans are part of the deception," suggested Corporal Yamamoto, but his voice lacked conviction. A week later, as part of a carefully supervised reward system for work details, the camp authorities arranged a rare treat. A small group of prisoners with the best behavior records would be allowed to visit the McDonald's restaurant under guard. Lieutenant Watanabe, Sergeant Tanaka, and 5 others found themselves selected. The experience was disorienting from the moment they stepped through the doors. Bright lights illuminated spotless white and red tiles. Behind a counter, young American workers in crisp uniforms operated machinery that cooked and assembled food with assembly line precision. The air was heavy with the scent of frying potatoes and grilled meat, the same smells that had first shocked them in the camp mess hall, but more intense, more purposeful. A young woman at the counter smiled at them, seemingly undisturbed by their Japanese faces or the armed guards accompanying them. "Welcome to McDonald's. May I take your order?" The prisoners stood frozen, overwhelmed by the normalcy of it all. Eventually, the guards ordered for them. Hamburgers, French fries, and Coca-Cola for everyone. Within minutes, the food appeared, wrapped in paper, the drinks in wax-coated cups with straws. Tanaka unwrapped his hamburger with the careful precision of a man disarming an explosive. The bread was soft and white, the meat perfectly round and uniform, garnished with ketchup, mustard, onions, and pickles. It was exactly like the hamburgers served in camp, yet somehow more significant here in this civilian setting. "How can this exist during wartime?" he whispered to Watanabe. "In Tokyo, civilians line up for hours for a cup of rice." Watanabe had no answer. He was watching an American family at a nearby table, a mother, father, and 2 children, eating hamburgers and laughing together. Their clothes were clean and unworn, their faces full and healthy. The children sipped their Coca-Cola through straws, unaware of their extraordinary privilege. This was not the starving, demoralized America that imperial propaganda had described. This was a nation so abundant it could maintain the routines and pleasures of peacetime, even as it fought across 2 oceans. The implications were staggering. If America could sustain such civilian comforts while waging global war, what did that reveal about its industrial capacity, its supply networks, its raw productive power? As the prisoners ate their McDonald's meals under the curious stares of local customers, a new understanding began to take shape, not through speeches or indoctrination, but through the simple evidence before them. America was not fighting the same war as Japan. It existed in a different reality altogether, one where scarcity was not the governing principle of daily life. Back at camp, the McDonald's experience became legendary among the prisoners. Those who had gone described every detail to those who hadn't: the brightness, the cleanliness, the casual abundance, the identical nature of each hamburger. Most disturbing of all was the revelation that McDonald's was not unique, but part of a chain stretching across the country, serving the same standardized meals to millions of Americans. Dr. Masaru Yamamoto, a prisoner who had been a professor of industrial engineering before the war, explained the significance to a group gathered in the barracks. "What you are describing is not just a restaurant," he said quietly. "It is a triumph of American mass production philosophy applied to food service. The same principles that allow them to build a Liberty ship every 4 days or a bomber every hour are being used to feed their civilian population with minimal use of labor or resources." His words hung heavy in the air as the prisoners contemplated this connection. If America applied industrial efficiency even to its hamburgers, how could Japan, with its limited resources and traditional production methods, possibly compete? As autumn turned to winter, the image of McDonald's remained a powerful symbol in the prisoners' minds. It represented something beyond mere food. It was evidence of an alternative way of organizing society, one that could deliver both guns and butter, that could fight a total war without requiring total sacrifice from its citizens. Some prisoners rejected these thoughts as disloyal. Others embraced them secretly, beginning to question the military leadership that had led them into conflict with such a formidable economic power. All of them, however, understood that the simple hamburger had revealed truths about their enemy that no military intelligence report could have conveyed. One snowy December evening, as the prisoners huddled in their heated barracks, Sergeant Tanaka made a confession to his bunkmates. "My younger brother died of malnutrition last year in Tokyo," he said softly. "He was exempted from military service due to his weak heart. Our mother could not obtain enough food for him on her rations, even with my military stipend. He simply wasted away." He paused, struggling with the next words. "Yet here, as a prisoner, I eat meat daily. I am healthier in captivity than I was in service to the emperor." No one rebuked him for this seditious observation. Instead, a heavy silence fell, broken only by Private Nakamura's quiet response. "My village received news that American bombers were targeting our food supplies to starve us into submission. Yet it seems they have so much food they can share it even with their enemies. What else have we been told that is not true?" This question rippled through the camp, unspoken but ever present. It was not just about food anymore, but about the foundation of their worldview. Every hot meal served with casual regularity, every glimpse of civilian American life with its apparent freedom from wartime hardship, chipped away at certainties that had once seemed unshakable. As 1945 began, the Japanese prisoners at Camp McCoy had developed a routine that would have been unimaginable in their previous military lives. They ate 3 hot meals daily, worked reasonable hours on local farms or in camp maintenance, received medical care when needed, and spent their free time in activities ranging from sports to crafts to language lessons. They were still prisoners, but their physical well-being exceeded that of many civilians back in Japan. This reality created a profound moral conflict. Their military training had prepared them for torture, starvation, and death at enemy hands, not for hamburgers, heated barracks, and humane treatment. The narrative of American barbarism that had justified their own military's harsh methods now seemed hollow. If America treated its prisoners this well, what did that reveal about the comparative values of the two societies at war? Perhaps, suggested Private Ito during one evening discussion, we have misunderstood the nature of true strength. We were taught that hardship breeds power, that sacrifice leads to victory. But here is America, treating even prisoners to hot meals, maintaining civilian restaurants during global war, building material abundance that makes sacrifice unnecessary. Which approach has proven more effective? No one answered, but the question lingered. For men raised in a culture that valorized endurance of hardship, the American approach to warfare, with its emphasis on abundance rather than austerity, was not just different, but philosophically threatening. It suggested that their suffering, their sacrifice, had not been necessary heroism, but merely the result of inferior production and organization. For Lieutenant Watanabe, who had built his identity around the samurai tradition of discipline and privation, this revelation created a crisis of faith. If America could wage war more effectively without demanding spiritual transformation through suffering, what value remained in the ideals he had embraced? Was McDonald's, with its standardized, efficient delivery of comfort, a more powerful system than all the spiritual exhortations of his military training? While the prisoners wrestled with these questions, the regular rhythm of camp life continued. Each morning, they awoke to the smell of cooking food. Each day, they witnessed American abundance in 100 small ways, from the electricity that remained on all night to the freshly laundered uniforms distributed weekly. Each evidence of material plenty deepened their uncertainty about the war and their place in it. And all the while, the image of McDonald's, with its bright yellow arches promising identical hamburgers to any American who desired one, stood as a symbol of a society organized around principles they had been taught to despise, but now could not help but admire. In March of 1945, camp authorities arranged a special meal to recognize the prisoners' work on a large agricultural project. To their astonishment, McDonald's hamburgers were brought into the camp, hundreds of them, wrapped in paper and still warm, along with boxes of French fries and bottles of Coca-Cola. It was not the taste that surprised the prisoners, as they had grown accustomed to American food. It was the staggering implication that even in the 5th year of global war, America could spare resources for such gestures. Sergeant Tanaka sat with his hamburger, watching as his fellow prisoners unwrapped theirs. Across the mess hall, hundreds of identical meals were being consumed, mass-produced, standardized, yet of higher quality than anything available to Japanese civilians. The organizational capacity required to deliver this simple meal to prisoners of war, when multiplied across America's vast military and industrial complex, seemed overwhelming. "We are losing this war," Tanaka whispered to Private Nakamura beside him. "Not because our soldiers lack courage, but because we are fighting a nation that can produce abundance we cannot match." Nakamura nodded slowly. "My father always said that empty stomachs make poor soldiers. I never understood until now." Around them, the usual discipline of the Japanese prisoners had softened. Men laughed openly, drank their Coca-Cola with childlike pleasure, and discussed the meal without the careful self-censorship that had once marked their conversations. The McDonald's logo on the wrappers, those golden arches, had become familiar, no longer alien but recognizable as a symbol of American life. Dr. Yamamoto, observing the scene from his table, murmured to those around him, What we are witnessing is not merely food distribution, it is a demonstration of industrial philosophy. Each hamburger identical, each wrapper the same, everything designed for efficiency and scale.
This is how they build their bombers, their ships, their ammunition. They have removed the artisan and installed the system. His analysis was met with thoughtful nods. These men, many of whom had come from traditional crafts and small-scale agriculture, were beginning to understand the nature of the industrial giant they had challenged. A nation that could standardize its food could standardize anything and produce it in quantities that defied imagination. As spring arrived in Wisconsin, news of the war's progress reached the camp through permitted newspapers and radio broadcasts. The prisoners learned of the firebombing of Tokyo, of the fall of Iwo Jima, of the American advance toward the Japanese home islands. These reports might once have been dismissed as propaganda, but the evidence of American capacity surrounded them daily.
The hot meals, the heated barracks, the abundant medical supplies, all testified to a nation fighting from a position of material surplus rather than desperate sacrifice. One evening in April, as the prisoners finished their dinner, an unusual announcement came over the camp loudspeaker. The following day, a special group of visitors would be touring the facility, representatives from the International Red Cross, accompanied by journalists documenting prisoner treatment across the United States. The prisoners were instructed to continue their normal routines. "They will display us like animals in a zoo," muttered Corporal Yamamoto bitterly. Lieutenant Watanabe shook his head. "No, they will display their McDonald's hamburgers and heated barracks. We are merely proof of their moral superiority, that they can afford to treat even enemies with humanity." The realization stung, yet contained an uncomfortable truth. American humanitarian treatment of prisoners was not just kindness, it was a demonstration of strength. Only the truly powerful could afford such generosity to the defeated. When the visitors arrived the next day, they found the Japanese prisoners clean, well-fed, and engaged in their usual activities. The camp commander led the tour through the facilities, pointing out the mess hall with its 3 daily hot meals, the medical clinic with its modern equipment, the recreation areas where prisoners played baseball and volleyball. The journalists took photographs and notes, clearly impressed by the conditions. Sergeant Tanaka, working in the camp garden, overheard one Red Cross official remark with approval. "They receive the same rations as American garrison troops. Remarkable!" The camp commander responded with casual pride. "It's standard procedure. We're signatories to the Geneva Convention. Besides, it's easier to maintain order when the men are well fed." This practical approach to humanitarian treatment struck Tanaka forcefully. In Japan, prisoners received the minimum needed for survival, often less. Resources were too precious to waste on the defeated. Yet here was America, turning humanitarian treatment into another system of efficiency. Well-fed prisoners caused fewer problems, required less guard intervention, and created positive international publicity. Even their compassion was pragmatic, industrialized like their hamburgers. That evening, as the prisoners gathered in their barracks, the discussion turned to what they had witnessed. "They showed us off like prize cattle," said one bitter voice. "See how well we treat our Japanese prisoners while they starve our boys in their camps." "But it is true," replied Private Nakamura quietly. "We are treated well, better than we would treat them." The silence that followed acknowledged this painful truth. Their own military code had taught them that surrender was shameful, that captives deserved only contempt. Yet America had responded to their surrender not with cruelty, but with McDonald's hamburgers and heated barracks, a powerful contradiction of everything they had believed about their enemy. Lieutenant Watanabe, who had remained largely silent throughout the day's events, finally spoke. "We have been defeated not just militarily, but philosophically. Our leaders taught us that spiritual strength would overcome material advantages, that our willingness to sacrifice would prevail against American decadence. But their decadence, as we called it, was actually efficiency. Their individualism, which we despised, created abundance we cannot imagine. Even their hamburger restaurants reveal a system of production we have no answer for." His words hung in the air, too true to dispute, yet too painful to fully embrace. For many, it was easier to focus on the simple daily rhythm of camp life, the morning roll call, the work details, the 3 reliable meals, than to confront the larger implications of American abundance. Yet as they lay in their bunks that night, the image of McDonald's golden arches floated in many minds. Those simple yellow curves had become a symbol of everything they had not understood about their enemy: the industrial might, the standardization, the capacity to wage war while maintaining civilian comforts. A nation that could keep hamburger restaurants operating during a global conflict was not merely wealthy. It possessed a fundamentally different relationship to resources and production. Summer brought news of more American victories in the Pacific, each report making the eventual outcome clearer. The prisoners worked in the fields surrounding Camp McCoy, harvesting crops that would feed both Americans and themselves. The bounty of the Midwest farmland was another revelation: fields stretching to the horizon, mechanical harvesters doing the work of hundreds of men, grain silos taller than village temples. In August, the news of atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki reached the camp. The prisoners gathered in stunned silence as the announcements were translated. Even America's weapons, it seemed, operated on a scale that defied imagination. Within days came Emperor Hirohito's surrender broadcast, marking the official end of the war that many prisoners had already recognized as lost. As they contemplated returning to a defeated Japan, many felt a complex mixture of emotions. Relief at the war's end mingled with apprehension about the condition of their homeland and families. But there was something else, something few would admit openly: a kind of wonder at what they had witnessed in America, a recognition that they had glimpsed a different way of organizing society, one built around abundance rather than scarcity, around standardization rather than tradition. Sergeant Tanaka, preparing for repatriation, carefully folded a McDonald's wrapper he had saved from months earlier. He planned to take it home, not as a souvenir, but as evidence of what he had learned. The simple paper with its Golden Arches logo contained for him the secret of American victory. Not just military might, but the philosophy of standardization, efficiency, and mass production that had allowed a nation to fight a global war while still serving hot hamburgers to its citizens and even its enemies. "What will you tell them back home?" Private Nakamura asked him, noticing the wrapper. Tanaka considered the question carefully. "I will tell them that we did not just fight against American soldiers. We fought against McDonald's hamburgers too, and perhaps they were the stronger opponent." As ships carried the former prisoners across the Pacific toward a Japan transformed by defeat, many carried similar tokens and memories, evidence of an America that propaganda had never prepared them to understand. They had expected torture and instead received hot meals. They had anticipated starvation and found abundance. They had been taught to despise American individualism and materialism, only to discover that these values had created a society strong enough to wage global war without sacrificing civilian comforts. The most profound lesson was not about food or even industrial capacity. It was about two fundamentally different approaches to warfare and society. Japan had embraced sacrifice, austerity, and spiritual strength, mobilizing every resource toward military victory. America had pursued abundance, standardization, and material comfort, creating systems efficient enough to serve both military and civilian needs simultaneously. The hamburgers that seemed so trivial, mass-produced meat on standardized buns, represented a philosophy of abundance that ultimately proved more powerful than any call for sacrifice. In the decades that followed, as Japan rebuilt from the ashes of defeat, many former prisoners would watch with mixed emotions as McDonald's restaurants eventually opened in Tokyo, Osaka, and other Japanese cities. The golden arches that had once symbolized enemy abundance became fixtures of a new Japan, one embracing the very systems of mass production and standardization that had once seemed so foreign. Perhaps this, too, was part of the legacy of those wartime revelations. Beyond the victory of armies lay the victory of ideas about how to organize production, how to create abundance, how to build societies where even simple pleasures like hamburgers remained available during times of great struggle. What began as disbelief in a prisoner of war camp ultimately transformed into a new understanding that would help reshape the post-war world, one hamburger at a time.